Raise your hand, metaphorically, if you have a man in your life who you care about. Now raise your hand if you believe in equality. If you did, this video is definitely for you. I recently tuned into an episode of the Megyn Kelly show where she interviewed an expert by the name of Lori Richards, who specializes in crime analysis and who has a very impressive resume, training with the FBI and working with Scotland Yard to train police officers in detecting crime and specifically in matters of domestic violence. Going into the episode, I knew that the topic would be focusing on male family annihilators because it was in the title. But what I wasn't expecting, and what I found immensely off-putting and disappointing, is an expert in the field, a criminal behavior analyst, so someone who has a lot of gravitas and credibility, who was pushing the tired and, quite frankly, incredibly dangerous and misleading narrative of men are the abusers and women are their victims. And I think what disappointed me even more was Megyn Kelly herself, who personally talks about abusive women, or maybe women who display very disturbing and alarming and concerning patterns of behavior, like Meghan Markle and Amber Heard. And she didn't even bother challenging her on that statement. Or rather, I should say, on that notion, because the entire episode centered on how men are always the perpetrators. I mean, she didn't even acknowledge, as far as I can remember, that women perform these heinous acts as well and should be held accountable. In fact, she went out of her way, Lori Richards, to say, yes, and it is men. I'm talking about men because it's always men.
And the picture is always the same. And that's of a man, because we are talking about men. This is very much a male related issue. It's a man who wanted to coercively control, and coercive control are the key hallmarks and what we should be asking about.
I mean, it's 2023. Are we still seriously pretending that this old and tired and archaic narrative is anywhere near remotely accurate? But, as always with these very sensitive topics, allow me to make a disclaimer before I proceed any further. I am aware that statistically, women are more prone to being the victim of men, especially when it comes to domestic violence cases. However, that does not mean that it doesn't happen to men, that it doesn't happen in the reverse, because it does. And I will be presenting you with a couple of real-life case studies of how dangerous and how life-threatening these incidents can be when a man is on the receiving end of this abusive behavior. Although, I will say that statistics may be misleading in this instance because of certain messages in society that we will talk about briefly, leading to the vast underreporting of cases in which men find themselves to be victims. So maybe the statistics are low because men don't report as often as women because they're not encouraged to. So please bear in mind that even if this happens less often, that doesn't mean that men don't deserve the protections and the resources and the support that women receive. I mean, this is why I asked you, are you all about equality? This is real equality. Now, unlike Ms. Richards, I'm not a trained criminal behavior analyst. However, I am a young lawyer and a young woman who lives on this planet and who has witnessed firsthand the incredibly serious and sinister side effects of living in a world where men are made out to be invincible at the hands of a woman, meaning a woman can do a man no harm. In fact, breaking apart and attacking this notion is the entire genesis for my channel. I decided to use this platform to raise awareness about the plight of men who suffer silently at the hands of their female perpetrators. And I'm not talking necessarily criminal females. I'm talking even really alarming red flag type behavior, which Lori Richards lists as being the exclusive domain of the male abuser, which is so far from the truth. Now, we live in a world where young women and women in general are told to be alert, to keep an eye out, and to seek support, to report, to have your friends around you, to go walking around in groups, don't be alone with such and such. We're told to keep our guard up because we have to. It is a biological reality that we are weaker and we can be overpowered. I'm not negating or arguing against that. But there is a serious lack of imparting a similar message, if not exactly the same, to the young boys in this world, who happen to be roughly 50% of the population. And yet we pretend that they're safe, especially at the hands of a woman. Then tell me, why is it that every day I log into the internet, I hear a case about a man getting senselessly murdered, usually by their romantic partner, but sometimes by a jealous ex, sometimes by a stalker, who's been rejected, or even by a complete stranger in the midst of a Tinder hookup. And if what Lori Richards says is true, which is that family annihilators are basically male, then why is it that we have the Lori Vallows of the world, who is currently undergoing trial for the murder of her 2 children? I'm sure you've all heard about this case. And she's just the tip of the iceberg. Just a quick Google search will reveal list after list after list of notorious, well-known cases where women kill their children for no reason whatsoever, thereby annihilating their own family. And these are only the infamous ones that have caught our attention. Imagine how many go unnoticed because they weren't newsworthy, or maybe even they weren't reported. So I'm sure you can understand how frustrating it is to sit there and listen to an expert in the field push this false narrative of these kinds of crimes are too heinous for a woman to really be involved in. Even if it's rare, it's still worth acknowledging. It's still worth alerting the young men, or just men in general, that, hey, if you're noticing any of these red flags, maybe just keep your guard up. Don't sweep it under the rug like Travis Alexander, Jodi Arias' victim, did. Because that led to a very brutal end for that young man. Now, I mentioned these red flags. Lori Richards talks about them, pretending that they are exclusively within the male domain. So only men exhibit such behavior. And these behaviors include stalking, controlling behavior, micromanaging everything their partner does, controlling who they can see, who they can be friends with, isolating them from their friends and family, forcing them to take photos of where they are and who they're with. You get the gist. And as someone who not only covers, more famous people who exhibit some or all of these very disturbing patterns of behavior, like Meghan Markle and Amber Heard and Jodi Arias, but as someone who knows men in my actual personal life who have been subjected to this sort of behavior by women, I couldn't just sit there, in good conscience and let this expert spread this false narrative without trying to combat it with reality. And that's why I hope you stick around for this video. You're going to hear from a person in the flesh briefly, talk about the consequences, the dire consequences of not preparing our young boys, young men, to deal with these scenarios and not taking them seriously should they ever have the misfortune of being subjected to these scenarios. You'll also hear from the victim of a very high-profile case, and that one had a much more tragic end. And by the way, while I'm here, it's not just men who need protecting from women. It's us women too. Ironically, we don't even teach women to look out for warning signs or red flags being displayed by other women who may want to come after them, which is equally as harmful. I would direct you to a very famous case called the Stephanie Lazarus case. If you haven't heard of it yet, I urge you to do so. It is a very real story, and it hits very close to home for me personally, because I've only been ever assaulted and stalked and harassed by females. And you know why? Because it's something that I wasn't on the lookout for. I didn't have my guard up. I downplayed it. I trivialized all the red flags because I too as a woman, thought that, women are harmless. What's she gonna do? And boy, did I learn the hard way exactly what some women can do. And the worst part is, when I did raise the alarm, when I did alert everyone that this was happening to me, in one instance, I was trying to raise the alarms right before, I'm saying a few mere seconds before I was physically assaulted. I was laughed at, ridiculed, told to relax, and to stop ruining the night. Why? Because it was a woman, and she was viewed as harmless. In fact, I was told, she's all talk. Don't worry about it. She's harmless. So imagine when a young woman like myself, who at the time, this was a couple of years ago, was in the age bracket of 18 to 24, the most vulnerable age bracket, apparently, when I wasn't taken seriously. Imagine the response, or lack thereof, when a young man is the one raising the alarm bells. Enter my partner, Zach, a young man and a real-life case study of what can happen to other men like him if society continues to refuse to take their safety seriously. Zach, can you briefly describe what happened to you this past decade?
I was stalked, harassed, and sexually assaulted by a woman.
At any point before it happened to you, did you ever imagine, or were you ever told that as a young man, this could potentially happen to you at the hands of a woman?
No. No one warns you that women are capable of this.
And were you ever instructed on what to do if you were to find yourself in such a situation?
No. You're left out in the dark as a guy. I know women get that.
And when you eventually did find yourself in this situation, were you taken seriously when you raised alarm bells?
No, not at all. Lots of people just like to sweep it under the rug, just toughen up, ignore it. It's not a big deal.
How did you feel about that?
I felt horrible, but I didn't have anyone to share those feelings with. So I internalize it, and some people make you feel like it's your fault because you know, you're a guy. How could, if you're weak, it's your fault.
And you didn't go to the police initially, correct?
No, I did not.
And why is that?
Because I didn't even know that was an option until it was too late and it went too far.
And why didn't you know that was an option?
Because no one tells you these. If your own friends don't take you seriously, why do you think anyone else is going to?
And when you eventually decided to go to the police, what were your expectations of how it would be handled?
I expected nothing. I hoped that they would at least write it down and have a record of it, but I expected them to almost laugh me out of the station.
Now, luckily for Zach, the police actually did miraculously end up taking his report seriously. But not all men were met with the same fortune. I've mentioned the Lori Vallow case earlier in the video, and I'm certain that a lot of you are already familiar with it. Like I said, Lori's currently undergoing trial for annihilating her family, something that Lori Richards seems to think is exclusively a male thing. Now, Lori's 2 children were not the only victims of her and Chad Daybell. There was Chad's wife at the time, Tammy Daybell, who mysteriously died, and Lori's husband before she married Chad, Charles Vallow. Now, I'm going to be showing you footage of Charles. Very heartbreaking body cam footage. Don't worry, it's nothing graphic. But what I want you to focus on is how strong and beefy and muscular of a man he was. Charles Vallow was an athlete, a professional baseball player, and he still felt unsafe, as you will hear, and feared for his life because his wife at the time was losing her mind and threatening him.
So what makes her a danger to herself and to others?
She threatened me, murder me, kill me.
She threatened to murder you?
Yes. And she said,
How did she do that?
My bishop right there is in the car. He was on the phone with me today when she said, I will have you destroyed. That's what she said there.
Okay, that's not a threat to kill you.
Yesterday was a threat to kill me. The day
Okay.
before was a
What
threat to
did
murder
she say yesterday?
She said, you're not Charles. I don't know who you are, what you did with Charles, but I can murder you now with my powers.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
She says, I'm gonna kill you too. I've tried to support her as much as I could, but it's gotten really, really bad lately. She's had a break. She says, I'm Nick Schneider. I've taken over Charles's body, and Charles has been killed. I'm gonna kill you. You're gonna be murdered today or tomorrow. I can do it. With my priesthood, with my powers. She does priesthood blessings. She does.
So who's
so
Nick
upsetting.
Schneider? Okay.
That's who I'm supposed to do.
A few months after this footage, Charles Vallow was dead. Lori Vallow had essentially orchestrated his death, that's what the argument is, with her brother Alex Cox, who is now deceased. And in the space of 20 minutes one morning, when Charles arrived to take his son JJ to school, he ended up losing his life. Oh, and in case you were wondering, here's footage of his grieving wife Lori a mere few minutes, I don't know, maybe an hour tops, after her husband was murdered.
How long have you guys lived here?
I'm sorry?
How long have you lived here?
Like 3 weeks.
Oh, geez. Yeah, okay.
That's why the neighbors don't know us.
Gotcha.
Like, hi neighbor, sorry.
From what I've been able to learn, the most that took place as a result of Charles's complaints and reports is that Lori was forced to submit to a involuntary psych evaluation, which she passed with flying colors. Now, I don't know the details of that psych eval, I'm not a psychologist, but I find it really ironic that she passed, because this is the same woman who ended up delaying her trial for almost 3 years because she was found to be mentally unfit to stand trial. But somehow, she passed the psych eval with flying colors. I mean, you have to wonder, was it this giggly, girly, oh my God, I'm such a funny, cool gal next door act that she employed in this interview right after her husband's death that got her through that test? Did she charm the officers with her feminine ways? Because that's essentially what happened after they let her go when it was deemed that her husband's death was, a result of self-defense. Nothing was suspicious. They didn't even consider, from the looks of it, the reports and the body cam footage of Charles Vallow telling them that he feared for his life because of her, not because of her brother. And none of that seemed to matter. Why? Is it really far-fetched to arrive at the conclusion that it was simply because she's a woman? And it really makes you beg the question, had Charles Vallow been taken seriously? Had Lori been investigated and had more measures been taken into protecting him, would he still be alive today? And by extension, would that killing spree have been nipped in the bud, sparing not only Charles, but Tylee and JJ and Tammy Daybell? And I think we could all safely say that had Charles Vallow been a woman making all these reports and complaints, fearing for her life at the hands of her husband, the police would have handled her case a lot more seriously. So you see what I mean when I say that this concept of women being harmless is actually really dangerous? And when you contrast her behavior after the murder of her husband and how easily they believed her and let her go, to Chris Watts' behavior, a male family annihilator, and how he was instantly pegged as a suspect because of the way he was behaving. It was wrong. It wasn't right. But neither was Lori's behavior. But you see the discrepancy here? One was instantly viewed as a suspect, and rightfully so, but those same instincts, those same measures were not applied to Lori. And that's a problem. And that problem is potentially rooted in how these police officers are trained, which is where Laura Richards will come again later in the video. Now, as for that statistics argument, of 1 in 3 women, for example, are victims of domestic violence, whereas 1 in, let's say, 50 men are, or 1 in 20 men are. The problem with these statistics is that they have this real-life effect of making people think that, it doesn't happen as often to men, we should afford less resources. But one of, because I'm sure there are many, the dangerous side effects of this way of thinking is men are not told by society, as you heard from Zach, to report these incidents. So they may be happening right now as we speak, maybe even to someone you know, someone you care about, but they're not saying anything Because society tells them you're a man, you're strong, you can't be overpowered by a woman, you can't be violated by a woman, and so they don't report it. But I also would urge everyone to stop viewing people as a number. You know, whether it's a woman or a man. Statistics, you know, they're useful, but they have a tendency to dehumanize the subjects, which are human in this instance. Both men and women, surprise, surprise, right? So rather than seeing it as a 1 in 20 men versus 1 in 3, see it as that 1 in 20 could be a man I love, a man I care about, a man I worry about. You know, your son, your brother, your partner. Maybe then it will help you realize that the numbers shouldn't matter. Just because something doesn't happen as often, it doesn't mean it shouldn't be addressed. We need to stop looking at people as statistics and start looking at them as humans with equal value and equal rights and protections. That is true equality. And in my humble opinion, I don't want to make this about feminism because it's not, but that's my understanding of feminism. Equality, not trying to rise above a particular gender. So why do we as a society tolerate so much of what certain women do? Because this isn't all women, you know? There are some wonderful, lovely women out there. In fact, I would say it's the majority, hopefully. But are we really stubbornly holding on to this antiquated notion simply because it's the status quo? When are we finally going to accept that controlling behavior is a red flag, regardless of gender? Or that certain acts like stalking are crimes, regardless of the gender? Or more importantly, because I think this is an area that we are very behind on, a man can be sexually violated by a woman. And even when we acknowledge that this behavior happens, which we do, you see us talking about Meghan Markle with her controlling behavior, and we'll get to that. But when are we going to finally stop trivializing everything a woman does? Or worse, using that behavior as an example of her strong and free and fierce independent spirit. If, for instance, the roles with Meghan and Harry were reversed, and I'm specifically talking here about controlling behavior or red flags. I'm not accusing Meghan of being a criminal because she is not. But if we view the dynamics of that relationship and just swap the genders, if Harry was the one dragging her around him by the arm, shoving her out of the way, stepping in front of her and cutting her off mid-sentence when talking to dignitaries on camera in front of everyone to see, isolating her from her friends and her family and her country, forcing her to do things against her will, like holding his hand when she clearly doesn't want to. Would people be siding with Harry and calling him a fierce and strong independent man and rewarding this bad behavior with humanitarian and gender equity awards? Or if Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, another case that I've sunk my teeth into on this channel, if their roles were reversed and Johnny ended up losing a defamation case against Amber, would the media be spinning this sorry and pathetic tale of Amber Heard only lost because she was an imperfect victim? Or the age gap was huge between them. A 25-year-old woman can do whatever she wants to a man. It shouldn't matter? Because yes, people were saying that. She was 25, 26 at the time. Let her slap him. He can take it. Or if Tessa Dunlop, who very recently covered a man's mouth while he was talking on live TV, if a man did that to a woman, would they still have a career right now? I mean, people tried to cancel Jeremy Clarkson for writing a really bad joke in an article. But when a woman basically physically assaults a man on live TV, it's fine. You just sweep it under the rug because it's a woman. She's harmless. Getting into more serious territory here. If Lori Vallow was a man, would we be already hearing now that she was brainwashed by Chad Daybell and that's why she did everything she ended up doing? Would we be removing all responsibility from her if she were a man and assigning it to her female partner? And would we have given her the benefit of the doubt for so long to even allow all these heinous crimes to take place? Because that's what happened. They never took her seriously. And look where we ended up. And by the way, if you think that Chad Daybell did brainwash Lori Daybell, just take a look into her past. I mean, the woman participated in the Wheel of Fortune back in the early 2000s because God told her to. So I rest my case. So let's say we're all interested in fixing this. We're all on board. Where do we start? Well, firstly, I think in general, as a society, we need to start normalizing men being vulnerable. Because, surprise, surprise, they're human, soft and squishy, just like us women. So if we're gonna start preaching equality with, don't raise girls to like pink and play with Barbies, and don't raise boys to like blue and play with cars, let's not raise boys into thinking that they're pretty much invincible at the hands of a woman, because I think I've established just in this one video that that's not true. Both girls and boys deserve to be protected. They deserve to be taught from a young age what to look out for, not to easily trust anyone, and what to do if, God forbid, something happened to them. Now, I don't have children. I'm really not interested in having them either, so that's a huge headache of my back, but I'm sure those of you who do have sons and brothers, I have brothers, don't want them to go through life thinking that they can't seek help. Or worse, when they do seek help, they don't get it. But even more importantly, aside from the way that we raise our children, as someone who has directly dealt with police in domestic violence cases involving male victims of female perpetrators, I have unfortunately seen firsthand how blasé police officers are when it's a male victim who presents themselves. And I'm not talking about very serious cases where a man would potentially present himself and he's battered, bruised and all that. I'm talking they outwardly look fine, but they're anything but on the inside. And I personally saw a police officer tell a male victim to his face, and he was trying to be sympathetic. He wasn't being flippant. But what he said was, unfortunately, when it comes to these things, with the law, we men have the short end of the stick. And it's true. I've seen it happen. I've seen it play out right before my eyes. I mean, you saw it in the body cam footage with Charles Vallow. The unsettling thing is, we have experts like Laura Richards training these police officers in matters of domestic violence, amongst other things. And boy, were there some chilling red flags when I heard her say things such as training the police to not believe the calm, cool, and collected male narrative. Because that's what she said. Women tend to usually be hysterical, more emotional, whereas the men are more calm and collected, which is true. But it's got nothing to do with gender, because I've seen it play out the other way around. I've seen a male victim of domestic violence trembling and crying and trying to hold himself together in court, where he was forced to come face to face with his female perpetrator, who was giggling and laughing and playing with her hair throughout her testimony. You telling me that the police are not trained in dealing with this? They think that when a woman like Lori Vallow is giggling and playing with her hair and making small talk and smiling, that means she's innocent? If we're gonna train our police officers to detect alarming red flags from men, then why not just remove the gender component and just teach them to detect red flags, period? I mean, does this woman cherry pick the cases that she works on? Is she only called in as an expert, in cases where the perpetrator is always male and the victim's always female? Because we know that that's not reality. And in my humble opinion, I think approaching cases in the way Laura Richards expressed in the Meghan Kelly show is quite sexist. We're gonna train the officers to deal with male perpetrators, pretending that female perpetrators don't exist. Meghan Kelly also talks about her own experiences with a male stalker, which was obviously very harrowing, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone because I too have been stalked by a female in my case. But no one ever acknowledged, not even for a second, that stalking is not exclusively the domain of men. That women do it too, and it is arguable that it could be more sinister when a woman does it because society trivializes it. When you report a male stalker, it is taken at least 100 times more seriously than when a man reports a female one. Jodi Arias stalked her ex-boyfriend Travis until he was found dead. And that's just one famous example of what probably happens a lot more often than we think or know, because these cases go underreported, because we don't train our boys from a young age to take these things seriously, regardless of the gender of their perpetrator. See, it's all connected. It all comes around to the messaging in society. You know, I'm not just blaming parents. I'm not blaming parents at all, actually, because it's just the status quo. It's the world we live in. But I think, seeing as it's 2023, it's high time we started to move away from that old narrative and open up our eyes to the reality of men deserve protection too. And women too can be dangerous. Okay, I think that's a wrap. Thanks for listening to my TED Talk.